My neighbor knocked on my door and said, "I need to show you something on my phone, and I need you to sit down first." I thought he was going to tell me one of the oak trees in my backyard had fallen onto his fence again. I had no idea that what he was about to show me would change everything I thought I knew about my own family. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio, and I retired the same spring my wife, Carol, was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. That diagnosis reshaped the next 4 years of my life completely. I became her caretaker, her companion, her memory, when hers started slipping away. We sold the house in Columbus, the one we'd raised our kids in, the one with the leaky basement and the garden. Carol loved and moved into a smaller ranch-style home in Marysville, about 30 minutes northwest. Quieter, easier to manage. One story, no stairs. I did everything I could to make those last years good ones for her. Carol passed away 14 months ago, peaceful, in the bedroom, on a Tuesday morning in October when the light was coming in gold through the curtains. After she was gone, I didn't know what to do with the silence. My son Daniel stepped in. That's what I told myself. He started calling every day, then coming by on weekends. He helped me sort through Carol's belongings. He drove me to appointments. He was attentive in a way he hadn't been since he was a teenager, and I was grateful for it. Grief does strange things to a person. It makes you reach for whatever warmth is offered without asking too many questions about why it's being offered. Daniel is 41. He works in real estate. He's good-looking in the way that makes people trust him before he's said a single word, and he's always known it. His younger sister, my daughter Rachel, has never quite trusted him. She lives in Portland now, works as a physical therapist, calls me every Sunday. Even when Carol was sick, Rachel would fly out twice a year just to sit with her mother and hold her hand. About 8 months after Carol passed, Daniel started talking about the house. He said it gently at first that the Marysville place was too much for one person, that the yard needed upkeep I couldn't manage alone, that property values in the area had started to climb, and I'd be foolish not to take advantage. He mentioned a condo development outside of Dublin, Ohio, newer, smaller, low maintenance. He'd already spoken to a realtor, he said, just to get a sense of numbers. I told him I wasn't ready. He backed off. For about 3 weeks. Then he brought it up again, this time with printed listings and a folder of financials. He'd also brought a document he wanted me to look at, a durable power of attorney, he explained. Just something that would let him help manage things during the transition. In case anything happened to me, he said. In case I needed help. He slid it across the kitchen table like it was nothing more than a grocery list. I didn't sign it that night, but I kept the folder. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Daniel had already identified a buyer for the Marysville house. He had already spoken to a financial advisor about my retirement accounts. He had been building something, quietly and carefully, the way you build a trap from the outside in, so the person inside doesn't notice until the door is already shut. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I did eventually sell the house, not because Daniel pressured me into it, or at least that's what I believed at the time. I sold it because I walked into the bedroom one morning and stood there for 20 minutes without being able to remember why I'd come in, and I thought, Carol is gone, and I am becoming someone who stands in empty rooms. Maybe Daniel is right. Maybe smaller is better. Maybe a change is what I need. I signed the POA 2 weeks before closing. I told myself it was practical. The condo was fine. Clean, modern, on the 3rd floor of a building called Riverbend Commons. Underground parking, a gym I never used, a small balcony that looked out at a retention pond. I moved in on a Saturday in late April. Daniel helped me carry boxes. He ordered pizza. We sat on the floor of the living room eating it because I didn't have a table yet, and he seemed happy. Relaxed, like a man who had finished a long project. I should have noticed that then. I had a neighbor across the hall, a retired postal worker named Walt. 68 years old, big hands, moved carefully the way men do when their knees have had enough of them. He'd lived in the building for 3 years. He introduced himself the morning after I moved in, brought me a loaf of banana bread his wife had made, stood in the doorway and told me everything I needed to know about the building in about 4 minutes flat. Which elevator was slow, which parking spots flooded when it rained, which neighbor on the 2nd floor played the television too loud after 10. Walt became the reason I still have a daughter. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I want you to understand it because I've read the questions people ask about stories like this one. Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And I want to be honest with you about the answer. You don't call the police when you don't yet have anything to show them. You don't call them when all you have is a feeling and a folder of real estate documents and a POA you signed because you were grieving and tired and your son seemed kind. You call them when you have proof. I didn't have proof yet. What I had was Walt. About 6 weeks after I moved in, Walt knocked on my door on a Sunday evening. He was holding his phone with both hands, the way people do when they're uncertain about something. He asked if he could come in. I said yes. He sat down on the couch, and for a moment he just looked at me, and then he said, "Gerald, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is your daughter okay?" The question hit me somewhere behind the sternum. "Rachel," I told him. "Rachel is fine. She's in Portland. What are you talking about?" Walt turned his phone around and showed me a photograph. It was a screenshot from a security camera, not a professional one. Just one of those small wireless cameras people put in their homes, the kind that connects to an app on your phone. The image was grainy and taken at night, but I could make out a room. A cluttered room. What looked like a cot along one wall. And curled on that cot, under a blanket, was a figure. The camera, Walt explained, was still connected to his app. He'd lived in the Marysville house before me, not as the owner, but as a renter for nearly 2 years. The previous owner had installed a few wireless cameras in the common areas, and when Walt moved out, one of them, the one in the basement storage room, had never been removed or disconnected. It was still on the same network, still feeding to the same app on his phone. He'd forgotten it existed until 3 days ago, when a motion alert woke him up at 2 in the morning. He'd looked at the app expecting to see an empty basement. Instead, he'd seen a young woman asleep on a cot in a room I didn't even know I had. I asked him why he hadn't called the police immediately. He said he'd thought about it, but he'd seen the moving truck, he'd met me, and he didn't know who the woman was or what the situation was. He didn't want to get something wrong. He wanted to come to me first. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I knew that basement. I had storage boxes down there, winter coats, old textbooks, a box of Carol's gardening books I couldn't bring myself to donate. I had been down there twice since moving in. I had walked past the storage room door. I had never opened it because the door had a padlock on it, and I assumed it was a utility room that the building managed. Up I'd look. The building didn't manage that room. That room was part of my unit. My hands were shaking when I handed Walt his phone back. I asked him to keep the app open. I asked him to not delete anything. I asked him to trust me for 24 hours while I figured out what to do. Walt looked at me carefully, the way men look at each other when they're deciding whether to ask more questions or just say yes. He said yes. That night, I did not sleep. I lay on my back in the dark and thought about Rachel. I thought about the last Sunday phone call, 5 days ago. She'd seemed normal. Tired, she'd said big caseload at the clinic. She'd asked about my new neighbor, about whether I was eating enough. She'd said she missed me. She'd said she'd try to come visit in August. Or had she? I lay there in the dark and I replayed the conversation, and I started to notice things I hadn't noticed in the moment. The background sounds had been wrong. No traffic. No Portland ambient noise. None of the familiar sounds I'd come to associate with her apartment. When I'd asked what she was having for dinner, she'd paused just a half second too long before answering. When I'd said I loved her, she'd said "you too" very quickly, very quietly, and moved on. I thought, what if that wasn't Portland? What if that was a basement 12 miles from where I was sleeping? Here is what I knew about my daughter. She had a moderate disagreement with her brother that had become a serious one about 8 months ago, right around the time Daniel started talking to me about the house. Rachel had called me then, upset. She said Daniel had asked her to sign something she wasn't specific, but she'd used the word financial, and she'd refused. She said she was worried about me. She said Daniel was, and I remember this exactly moving pieces around a board. Dad, and I don't think you're seeing it. I had told her she was being dramatic. I had told her Daniel was trying to help. After that, her calls had continued normally. She still called every Sunday. She still sounded like herself, mostly. But the visits stopped. She'd said work was busy. I'd accepted that. Now I lay in the dark, and I thought about the padlock. And I thought about the camera, and I thought about how very convenient it was that the one person who would have asked questions, the one person who would have pushed back, had gradually, quietly, become unavailable. I did not call Daniel. That is the most important thing I did that night. Nothing. I did not tip my hand. I did not ask him about the basement. I did not tell him what Walt had shown me. Because I understood, lying there in that bedroom, that if Daniel knew I knew, whatever was happening in that room could change very fast. And not in Rachel's favor. In the morning, I called Rachel's cell phone, voicemail. I called her clinic in Portland. The receptionist put me on hold for a long time, then came back and said Rachel hadn't been in for about 6 weeks. A family matter, she'd been told. She seemed apologetic. 6 weeks. I called a lawyer, not a family friend, not someone Daniel knew. I drove to a strip mall in Westerville and found a general practice attorney named Karen who had a laminated sign in her window and a walk-ins welcome policy. I sat across from her at a small desk, and I told her about the POA. She told me what I needed to hear. A durable power of attorney can be revoked. In Ohio, all you need is a written, signed, and dated revocation document. It does not require the agent's consent. She drafted one while I sat there. I signed it. She notarized it. I left with a copy. Then I went home and I called Walt. I told him I needed him to do something for me. I needed him to save every screenshot, every recorded clip, everything the app had stored. I needed timestamps. I needed him to back everything up somewhere besides his phone. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Already did it." I saved it to my laptop and emailed it to myself last night. I wasn't born yesterday, Gerald. I nearly cried right there in the hallway. That afternoon, I went downstairs. I want to tell you I went down there calmly. I want to say I was composed, methodical, that I had a plan. The truth is I stood outside my own storage unit door for 3 minutes before I could make myself move. I had found the spare key to the padlock in a kitchen drawer when I moved in. I'd assumed it was for that utility room and set it aside without thinking twice. I had it in my pocket now. The key turned. The room beyond was small, maybe 12 by 14 feet. Concrete walls. A single bare bulb on a pull string that I didn't reach for immediately because there was already a small lamp on a battery-operated camp lantern sitting on a cardboard box. There were more boxes along one wall, mine, the ones I'd brought from Marysville, and along the other wall, a cot. And on the cot, there was my daughter. She was awake. She was sitting up, her knees drawn to her chest, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before and hope to God I never see again. It was the expression of someone who has stopped expecting anything. "Rachel," I said. It came out barely above a whisper. She looked at me for a long moment. Then her face broke open in a way that had nothing to do with happiness, at least not the kind I'd known before. She made a sound, not a word, not really, and she reached for me. And I crossed the room in about 2 steps and held her while she shook. She was thin, thinner than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was unwashed. There was a small battery-powered hot plate on another box with a few cans of soup beside it, and a plastic water jug, and a phone, her phone, I noticed. But the SIM card had been removed, so it could only connect to Wi-Fi. Daniel had set up a Wi-Fi extender somewhere nearby. That was how the Sunday calls had worked. She'd been using the Wi-Fi to call me. He'd let her make those calls, had probably coached them, had probably stood somewhere nearby making sure she said the right things. He had let her call her father every week. I don't know if that was meant to be kind or if it was just control. I think it was control. Rachel had not come to Portland for a visit 8 months ago when she'd gone quiet. She had come here to confront Daniel. She'd found a document in the mail, something forwarded to her old address by mistake, related to my retirement accounts. She'd driven to Marysville and Daniel had been there, at the house, doing something he shouldn't have been doing while I was at a doctor's appointment, they'd argued. She'd threatened to call a lawyer, to call the police, to call me. Daniel had said she could do any of those things. But then he'd shown her something on his phone. I still don't know exactly what it was. Rachel has not been ready to tell me the full version yet, and I won't push her, but it was enough to frighten her into a car, into a drive that ended at that basement room. She'd believed she was only there temporarily. She'd believed it would be over soon. That was 6 weeks ago. I made myself breathe. I made myself think. I told Rachel, "Do not move. Do not let on that anything has changed. I'm going to get you out of here today, but I need 1 more hour. Can you give me 1 more hour?" She looked at me the way a person looks when they've been waiting so long that 1 more hour is both nothing and everything. She said yes. I went back upstairs. I called Karen the lawyer. I told her I needed to report an unlawful imprisonment, and I needed to do it in a way that left no room for Daniel to maneuver. She told me to call the police and to do it now, not in an hour. She was right. But I also told her about the POA, about the retirement accounts, about what Rachel had told me regarding the document she'd found. Karen said she was coming. She was in her car before we hung up. I called 911. I told them my daughter was being held against her will in the basement of my home. I gave the address. I gave Daniel's name. I gave the make, model, and license plate of Daniel's car, because I had seen it in the parking garage when I came back upstairs. And I knew, I don't know how I knew, but I did that he was either in the building or nearby. He was in the parking garage. The officers found him there. He had a bag in his car, a duffel bag that contained, among other things, a folder of documents that included a second version of my POA, one with a forged signature that expanded his authority over my accounts beyond what I'd agreed to. He had the original account access information. He had a burner phone. He had been planning to move Rachel again. Walt's camera had been motion activated, and in its logs was a clip from 48 hours earlier of Daniel coming into the basement room, talking to Rachel, then leaving. Whatever that conversation had been about, something had shifted in his timeline. He'd been accelerating. If Walt hadn't knocked on my door when he did, I don't know where Rachel would have ended up. Rachel was taken to Mount Carmel Hospital that evening. Dehydration, malnutrition, borderline anemic. She had bruising on her wrists from the first week, she told me later, when she'd been less cooperative. She spent 4 days in the hospital. I slept in the chair beside her bed for all 4 of them. Daniel was charged with unlawful imprisonment, fraud, elder financial abuse, and forgery. His bail was set at an amount that made it clear the judge had read the file. He is awaiting trial. I have been told, by 2 separate attorneys, that the evidence is substantial. I believe them. In the months since, I have thought often about the moment I stood outside that storage room door with the key in my hand. I have thought about all the moments before it, the moments when I could have asked more questions, should have asked more questions, when I took Daniel's kindness at face value because grief had made me hungry for it. I don't torment myself with those thoughts. I made the choices I made. I also made the choice to go downstairs. I also made the choice to hold my ground for 1 more hour. I also made the choice to call a lawyer before I called my son. There are people who will read a story like this and say, "Why didn't you see it sooner?" And I understand that question. I asked it myself many times in that hospital chair while Rachel slept. What I came to understand is that the people who exploit grief are very good at it. They know exactly how much to give and how much to take. They know how to move slowly. They count on the fact that you want to believe the best about the people you love. That is not a weakness. That is what love is. But love also goes downstairs. Rachel is back in Portland now. She's been back for 2 months. She's working reduced hours, seeing a therapist, rebuilding. She calls me every Sunday, same as always. But the calls are different now, longer, fuller, louder. She laughs more. Last week she said she's thinking about getting a dog. I told her she should get 2. I have revoked the power of attorney. I have changed all of my account information. I have a new attorney, a good one, who is helping me understand what Daniel accessed and what can be recovered. Walt and his wife came to my apartment last month for dinner. I made the pot roast Carol used to make, the one with the onion soup mix and the baby carrots, and Walt ate 2 servings and said it was the best thing he'd had since Thanksgiving. I told him that was the nicest thing anyone had said to me in a year. There is a version of this story where Walt deletes the app, where he figures it's not his business, where he decides it's too late at night to knock on a neighbor's door over something he can't quite explain. I have thought about that version. I don't let myself stay in it very long. He knocked. That's the whole thing, really. He knocked and I answered and I went downstairs and my daughter is home. If you are watching this and something feels wrong in your family, in your finances, in the way someone close to you has started managing things, please listen to that feeling. Please make the call. Please talk to an attorney. Please do not assume that someone's kindness is free just because they're offering it with a smile. And if someone asks you to sign a document and your gut tightens when you read it, trust that tightening. I didn't. I'm telling you so you might. Rachel is getting a dog. Her brother is going to trial, and I am sitting on my balcony in the evening looking out at that retention pond, which turns out to be quite beautiful when the light hits it right. And I am grateful, genuinely, deeply grateful for an old man with a banana bread loaf and a forgotten camera on his phone. Sometimes the thing that saves you doesn't look like anything special. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor who knocks. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, please share it. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one.